Well, I feel very, very honoured indeed, because this is a famous and very magnificent university. So, of course, it's a great honour. I'm very pleased. Always had this parallel career. I've been writing for television and film since the 1970s. But I've always thought of the novel as a visual form. Long before there was cinema, there was the visual form of the novel. And so I can move between the two forms with comparative ease. It doesn't seem to me a wrench, really. What you lose when you write a screenplay, maybe two things. First of all, you're no longer in charge. A screenplay is a sort of recipe. It's not the meal. And you're working with maybe a dozen other people, but collectively 100 people. Everyone I know who's a writer is passionate about cinema. I mean, it is a beautiful and wonderful form. It'd be, I think, a strange position not to accept it as an art. Certainly it has its commercial, trashy corners, but then so does the novel. So, no, I think we've now accepted it's one of the great art forms of our time. What it lacks, though, is to be able to give you that inside feeling that the novel can, that investigation of what it's like to have a consciousness, to have emotions, really described in great detail. And we've learned over the years in literary modernism, in the 19th century novel too, forms of expressing character, consciousness, the flow of thinking, daydreaming, and all the great emotions, anger, disgust, love, delight. So we depend on actors in movies to try and do this, and some of them are extremely gifted, and we're very grateful. But a movie can never give you life from the inside. What role does the present play? Absolutely everything, I suppose. Sometimes you find yourself writing things, you've just absorbed the present through your skin rather than through the intellect or any kind of conscious decision. Many of my novels have just grown out of just the environment around me, just the world in which we live, without even thinking about it, just assuming it. So I think that, again, the kind of novel that interests me is the one that tells me what it's like to live now, with all the stretch of political, social change that we have, anxieties that we have, and also to live in a time of brilliant invention. I mean, technological change and scientific discovery running alongside very ancient problems of nationalism, populism, greed, and so on. These things are both ancient and modern in a curious mix. And the novelists who reflect it, not necessarily consciously, but they reflect it, are the ones that I admire most. Well, above all, the spy is an individual, cut loose, really, trying to discover his exact social allegiances. Because when we speak of the spy, we don't only speak of someone who is working for one side, often we're speaking of the double agent, or even the triple agent. So the private life of a spy somehow reflects our own anxieties of who we are. We move through the world, we're very much a part of a society, we belong in families, we belong in cities, but at the same time, we are private people with our own thoughts that nobody else can penetrate. And to that extent, we move through life like spies. And novelists in particular are like spies. So there's a great deal, I think, in the human condition that is carried on the back of writing a spy novel. Le Carré, I think, above all else, has caught for us in Britain the way in which we've had to deal with the decline of empire and our place in the world too. That's become a very strong element in Le Carré. More than any other writer, I think he has charted, especially through the 60s and 70s and 80s, our national fate and our uncertainties of who we are and what we're doing. My first stories were very wild, transgressive. I suppose I wanted to shock people a little and say, here I am. I've never quite lost that quality. I still hold to it. But slowly I've broadened out from my psychopathic narrators to address other interests of mine: music, love, science, religion, and many other related topics. So if I had to characterize my writing life, it's been a broadening, I suppose. I was still interested back in the 70s when I was a young man in all of those things, but I didn't write about them. I didn't know how quite to write about them. And so it's also a learning process of being more inclusive, maybe a little warmer, I think. Maybe I'm also more forgiving. I've tried to express a degree of optimism about human nature that I never had when I was in my 20s. I think when you're young you can be truly pessimistic because you don't feel so fully committed as when you have children and grandchildren. I desperately want the human project to survive and flourish. In my 20s I didn't really care. Lately, well, I've been watching a lot of movies lately. What amazes me now, we've had a very good year in movies. So I've seen a beautiful love story, Call Me By Your Name. I've watched an extraordinary movie with Daniel Day-Lewis called The Phantom Thread. Our actress who's in our movie on Chesil Beach has been in a movie called Lady Bird, which I thought was an extremely detailed, beautiful account of a young woman growing up, fighting with her mother, breaking away from home. I've watched a horror movie that's also a comedy, but also about race, called Get Out. This is, I think, a golden age of documentary. I'd recommend everyone to watch Icarus, which is about Putin's Russia and cheating at Sochi at the Olympics. So how do I bind all these together? I can't. There is no common theme to these movies except to say there's a beautiful spread of talent and energy and delight. Much of what I am as a writer came from the 3 or 4 years I spent studying literature at university, with no sense that I had to find a job. So for me it was just pure delight in opening up worlds of different literatures. I was lucky to go to a modern university which allowed me to read Cervantes and Thomas Mann and Kafka, and Proust, not just English literature. But also, I totally immersed in what I think is our great literary tradition, from Chaucer to the present. I think universities still occupy the place maybe that medieval monasteries did. They are the place where intellectuals can think and write and talk and have shelter from a often very crude, aggressive, commercial world. Very important to support them. And in science, of course, we really need them to push forward the boundaries. We're living again, I think, in a golden age of technology and science And of course universities are right at the heart of that.